Hey guys, it's Eric Sweatup and welcome back to part 5 of What If Yuji Was Like Aizen. Continuing where we left off, Yuji had just fought Higuruma, and he had made it so that Higuruma would join him later down the line. He was planting seeds for other people who shared the same ideals as him, so they could join him later in the new world. So for right now, the only thing that he needed to do was to attempt to gather as many allies as he could, ones that shared the same ideals as him. And if they didn't, they would simply be nothing more than a sacrifice for the new world. Yuji's next stop would be the Sendai colony. He would notice there were numerous sorcerers here who were pretty strong, and maybe some of them shared the same ideals as him. However, at the same time, he would notice there was a Jujutsu sorcerer here, and he didn't want to get tangled with them. He knew that they probably knew more than he thought they knew, seeing as Kenjaku told Yuji earlier that there was a mole in the Jujutsu high school, and that they were given information on how to get inside. Yuji knew that more than likely the mole was playing both sides, so he would stay on his toes and try to avoid the Jujutsu sorcerer, seeing as he didn't want to deal with that mess. However, just as Yuji would be scanning the area, trying to figure out where everybody was, he would suddenly be attacked by two different Shikigami. One would fly right towards him, attempting to strike him. However, Yuji would then begin exerting his cursed energy, making the Shikigami drop to the ground. Just then, Yuji would feel rumbling from underneath his feet, as a Shikigami would erupt from the ground, attempting to swallow Yuji whole. However, Yuji would simply start exerting his cursed energy even stronger, making the Shikigami crash right back down into the ground. Yuji would laugh and say that this was somewhat of an interesting technique. He only knows one other person who uses Shikigami, however they aren't as efficient as this guy was. Yuji would then turn, as he would notice a large amount of cursed energy gathering in one area, as all of a sudden, the Shikigami that were amassing around him would suddenly disappear. Yuji would crack a smile, saying that things were about to get interesting. Yuji would notice that a Jujutsu sorcerer had taken out the sorcerer that was attacking him. Yuji would then use a veil, covering himself up, and going to a tall building to try to realize what was going on. He would watch as Yuta was protecting civilians, trying to get them away as he was fighting a cockroach curse. Yuji would say that Yuta has a great heart. However, due to him being a Jujutsu sorcerer, he doubts that he'll share the same ideals as him. He was only going to sit back for now and watch what Yuta could do. Yuta would take care of the cockroach curse, finishing it off by pushing reverse curse technique inside of its body. Yuji would note that Yuta has a decent battle IQ. However, he would then see someone that would pique his interest. They would appear next to Yuta, blasting him across the area. As Yuta and Uro will begin their fight, Yuji would be close by listening to what each other has to say, seeing if he could play to their heartstrings. In the end, Uro would catch his interest once more. Someone who was betrayed and used by the Jujutsu Society. Someone who understands you shouldn't have to sacrifice yourself for others. That's not what it means to be a Jujutsu sorcerer, especially not in Yuji's eyes. This is when Uro would grab Yuta by the neck, pushing him outside of the building. This is when, at the same time, Ryu would then begin charging a granite blast from across the colony. He would tell them to not forget him, shooting the beam out. However, instead of it hitting both Uro and Yuta, Yuji would step in, contracting a barrier, stopping the attack head on. However, at the same time, Yuji would notice the output on that attack was incredibly strong. Even though Yuji has a strong output himself, he had never encountered someone like that. Last second, Yuji had to put even more cursed energy into the barrier, due to it almost shattering off impact. Yuta would notice Yuji immediately. Hearing the news from Mekamaru, Yuta would ask what the hell he was doing here, as Yuji would only smile, saying that it was nice to see one of his fellow classmates, as Yuta would get pissed off, telling Yuji that he wasn't his classmate. Yuji would then appear behind Uro, as he would put his hand on her shoulder, and he would tell her that he would like her to join his cause. Everyone would be shocked by this, seeing as no one saw Yuji move at all. However, if he was that fast enough to get behind Uro without anybody noticing, he must have been insanely fast. Uro would then attempt to turn around and use Thin Icebreaker. However, Yuji would simply grab her arm and telling her that there's no need for them to fight. He only wants to offer her a proposition. He would begin telling her that he was the one who started the culling games, not Kenjaku. Kenjaku was the one who used Auto Transfiguration, allowing you to reincarnate in this world. The rules are exactly the same as Kenjaku wants them to be. However, Yuji can stop the games whenever he wants to, and he plans on doing it the second he has enough cursed energy. He won't tell her his full plans, however, he wants her to join him in the world that comes after. Yuta would scream out, asking Yuji, does he truly believe he can create a new world solely by himself? This is when Yuji would turn at Yuta and tell him that no, he can't. That's exactly why he's gathering people who share the same ideals as him. Uro would refuse at first, attempting to use Thin Icebreaker on Yuji again. However, Yuji would then erupt the barrier around her, forcing her down to the ground. Yuta would then begin thinking Yuji's technique had to be some type of barrier technique. Due to the fact that he was only utilizing that, Yuta just had to not get caught by it. Yuji would then touch the ground as he would dismiss his barrier that was around Uro. He would tell her once more that he refuses to fight her. However, Uro would scream out, telling Yuji that she refuses to be a servant to anybody. She fell for that in her last life, and she refuses to do it again. However, Yuji would tell her that he will not have her live underneath him. They will live as equals. She will not be a tool that has to be used. She is free to do whatever she wants. However, in Yuji's new world, everyone will be equal, and everyone will live amongst each other. No one is over anybody. Yuji would also note to Uro that even though she's been betrayed by people, she still has her pride, and she refuses to be what other people believe she is. And that's exactly why he wants her to be a part of his new world. He's already recruited others, and he wants her to be a part of that. Yuta would attempt to rush in, trying to stop his conversation with Uro. As he would slash at Yuji, Yuji would just narrowly dodge out of the way, noticing that Yuta was fast. Yuta would then turn his blade around, dashing in at Yuji once more. He would throw a punch with his right, straight at Yuji's face. Yuji, however, would catch the punch, as Yuta would attempt to overpower him using pure cursed energy. However, Yuji would begin to laugh, telling Yuta that he's too naive, as he would begin to exert his cursed energy, crushing Yuta under the pressure. Yuta would begin struggling, as Yuji would tell Yuta that he doesn't want to get involved with any type of Jujutsu sorcerer, so he recommends that he just leaves him alone. He's only here to gather allies, and he doubts Yuta wants to join him. Uro would then tell Yuji that she doesn't want to live for anybody. She simply wants to live for herself. Yuji would then turn towards Uro and tell her that she is very welcome to live for herself. Yuji does not want to enforce any kind of rules on anybody. The only thing he wants to enforce is that people live equally. Not a single Jujutsu sorcerer, civilian, or cursed spirit will live indifferent from one another. If one person decides to step out of line, Yuji himself will deal with it. And if anyone tries to disrupt his plans, he will kill them, as he would begin to stare at Yuta. Uro having been betrayed before, she would tell Yuji that she refuses to believe him. However, she will keep it in mind. Yuji would then tell Uro that if she doesn't believe him, he will have to simply prove it to her. He would ask Uro, is there anything that she wants? However, Uro would simply tell Yuji that she simply wants her second chance at life, and for it not to be the same as her first one. She wants to live for herself and do things for herself, as Yuji would tell her that he understands. Yuji would then look over to Yuta and ask him, what will you do, Jujutsu sorcerer? Yuta would look at Yuji and Uro, realizing that they've come to a truce. He wasn't sure what he wanted to do. He knew Yuji was incredibly strong, due to the fact that Mechamaru told the Jujutsu sorcerers that were left alive that Yuji was the one that sealed Satoru Gojo. He knew that out of all of the students, he was the only one that could take on Yuji. However, there were much more things at risk instead of just Yuji. Sukuna was still a factor, Kenjaku was still a factor. Yuji was just one of the factors. There was too much going on, and not enough sorcerers to be able to handle it. Ryu would then attempt to jump in, throwing in another granite blast, screaming out, saying that we're getting too mushy around here. Where is everyone's pride as a Jujutsu sorcerer? As Yuji would step in front of the beam, being hit by it head on. However, as the smoke would settle, Yuji would tell Ryu that he simply doesn't like him. His indifference towards lives makes him a disgusting person. Yuji has not killed a single civilian during his entire time here. He doesn't believe any of them deserve to die. They are ones who've been trapped here. The only people Yuji has killed has been sorcerers that has attacked him. Yuji was never the one to start the fight. However, Ryu simply didn't care. If innocents were to get in his way, he wouldn't care. He would kill them needlessly. Ryu would then tell Yuji that he doesn't like all this talking and he simply wants a good fight. Throughout his entire past life, he was never able to find a dessert that was worthwhile for him. He wants something that's going to cure his insatiable boredom. He has no philosophical or villainous intent. He simply wants to enjoy the thrill of battle. Yuji would then look at Ryu and ask him, is that so? As the air around all of them would change, Ryu would immediately get on guard. As Yuji would begin to smile, Yuji would tell Ryu that he was going to cure his boredom right here and right now. He would then turn around to Yuta and tell him that he'd better not jump in, otherwise he was going to kill him too. Ryu would begin to sweat nervously, realizing exactly what he was getting himself into. Ryu would charge up a granite blast immediately, shooting it at Yuji, as Yuji would place the barrier around himself once more, stopping the blast in its tracks, as Ryu would realize this matchup was not in his favor. He would smile and laugh, calling Yuji a coward, asking him was he simply going to hide behind a barrier the entire fight, as Yuji would smile and tell Ryu that his childish remarks would get him nowhere. As Yuji would appear behind Ryu, striking him in the back, sending him flying into a building. Ryu would gather himself, shooting another granite blast at Yuji, as Yuji would simply sprint forward, dodging every blast. Ryu would then realize that he might need to put more distance between himself and Yuji, as even though Yuji was pretty skinny, he had insane physical prowess. He would begin jumping away, shooting granite blast at Yuji back to back, as Yuji would simply dodge out of the way, jumping from building to building, attempting to close the distance on Ryu again, as Ryu would find himself sprinting inside of a subway tunnel, as he would place himself right in front of Yuji. Yuji would stand outside the subway tunnel laughing, asking Ryu was this his big plan, putting him into a confined space so he could have a better chance at attacking him. Ryu would then smile, saying that Jujutsu sorcerers are supposed to think smart and that's how they're going to win. Yuji would begin laughing, telling Ryu that he can't deny that. As he would begin to rush forward, Ryu would begin shooting blasts back to back. Yuji would simply dodge over and over, as Ryu would begin to get concerned, as he would then charge a full power granite blast, filling up the entirety of the subway. As he would begin to smile, asking Yuji how did he feel about that, as Yuji would be behind Ryu telling him that it wasn't really that impressive. Ryu would attempt to strike Yuji in the face, however, Yuji was already 2 steps ahead of him, hitting him in the side of the stomach and hitting him in the face. Ryu would attempt to distance himself once more, however, Yuji would pull him closer, landing a devastating combo on him. He would punch him in the face with the left. As Ryu would attempt to strike back, however, it would be easily parried by Yuji, as Yuji would throw an elbow at Ryu's stomach, making him cough up blood. Yuji would then continue punching Ryu over and over. Ryu's technique was burnt out, and Yuji wasn't giving him a chance to regather himself. Yuji would then smile, asking Ryu was it really that smart of him to do that, as Ryu would only smile. However, Yuji would continue his combo, striking at Ryu over and over, until Ryu would yell out, screaming that he's had enough. He would kick himself off of Yuji, screaming at the top of his lungs. He would tell Yuji that a great meal is best enjoyed when both parties are enjoying it. He would proceed to make hand signs as he would scream out the words domain expansion. Yuji would then laugh as he would make hand signs as well. Yuji would then say the words domain expansion, mirror of 1,000 dreams. The domains would only clash for a moment. However, Yuji's domain would take over Ryu's in an instant. However, to Ryu, it seemed as if his own domain had won. Ryu's domain would be an area that's a starry night sky. As Ryu would point up into the air, beams from the sky would proceed to shoot out like fireworks going off in the distance, as they would blast themselves straight towards Yuji. It would strike him straight in the chest, causing him to be blasted backwards to the domain's wall. As Ryu would keep pointing, each beam would continuously strike Yuji over and over, until eventually, Yuji was a charred crisp on the ground, as Ryu would begin to laugh, telling Yuji that he really did satisfy him, and that he's grateful Yuji was able to show him such a great battle. The domain would seemingly collapse, however, Ryu would be sitting there smiling, as he would look towards Yuta and Uro. He would ask both of them, who is the next person to satisfy him? Ryu would feel in an absolute state of euphoria. However, unknown to Ryu, Yuji's domain had taken complete effect of him. Ryu's domain causes so whatever the other person caught inside his domain wills is exactly what will happen. However, only for them. They will be stuck in a trance-like state, believing whatever they believe, stuck inside of their own mind, until Yuji himself breaks them out of it. So while Yuji would collapse his domain, Yuta and Uro would see Ryu sitting there, staring up at the sky, talking to himself. Yuji would then turn around, as he would sit and ask the other two if they were ready to continue their conversation. Both Uro and Yuta would realize that Yuji was a lot stronger than he seemed to let on. He never really showed a true technique, and the one time he did, they weren't able to see it due to the fact that it was enclosed in his own domain. Yuji would tell Yuta that he refuses to let other Jujutsu sorcerers get involved in what he's doing, and that he doesn't actually wish to harm them. However, if they get in his way, he will be forced to. Yuta would then ask him what exactly is his goal, where Yuji would tell Yuta that all he wishes to do is create the perfect world and become the perfect being. He would tell Yuta that Tengen had willingly merged herself with him, and due to that fact, he only needed the cursed energy from the culling games. He would tell Yuta that once every single barrier is filled to the brim with cursed energy, he would merge that energy with himself, causing an evolution that would turn him into the perfect being, something like Tengen. But the evolution will not need sacrifices like Tengen. Tengen is the sacrifice, and so is Yuji. They will merge, and Yuji will simply evolve. Yuta would then ask Yuji, what is he going to do next then? As Yuji would say, his only goal for right now is to gather as much cursed energy as he can. He knows that Kenjaku plans on letting non-sorcerers inside the barrier, and when that happens, the cursed energy that's already inside of the barrier will almost double or triple, filling it up faster. Yuji already knows this because again, he's created the barriers, not Kenjaku. He already knows that Tokyo Colony number 1's barrier has been filled up to the brim. The other colonies are the only ones left that need to be filled. When Yuji is done here, he's going to go to the other colonies and try to fill the cursed energy there before any non-sorcerers get hurt. Yuta would then tell Yuji that he doesn't need to do all of this, and he could have asked the Jujutsu sorcerers to give him help. Yuji would then stop Yuta and tell him that even though Gojo Satoru wasn't fond of the higher-ups, he knows for a fact Gojo wouldn't support him in the plan that he has right now. Killing sorcerers and other people who disrupt the balance, Gojo would not have done that. Yuji knows that Gojo understands the weight behind certain decisions. However, the weight behind this decision is something Yuji is going to take on by himself. That's why he's been moving himself away from the Jujutsu sorcerers. That's why he took the necessary evil to seal Satoru Gojo. He was going to take all the heat from the higher-ups currently, making the Jujutsu sorcerers put all their eyes on him. And in doing so, he already knows a player inside of the barriers named Hana or Angel. They are going to be the one that will unseal Gojo Satoru. Yuji's already thought everything out. He's been 10 steps ahead of everybody. He just couldn't let anybody know. However, once again, Yuji is not on the side of the Jujutsu sorcerers, nor is he on Kenjaku's side. He is on his own side. He is willing to take the heat of everything and do everything for himself to create this new world for his grandfather. This is something he's sworn to himself ever since his grandfather died. His grandfather told him to become the perfect version of himself, so that's exactly what he's going to do. And once again, if the Jujutsu sorcerers or anybody will try to stand up to him, he will kill them. Once he gathers all the cursed energy that he can throughout the barriers, before he takes it all in, he's going to kill Sukuna and kill Kenjaku. And if he isn't strong enough to do so, he will simply absorb all the cursed energy, evolve, and then kill him. Yuji is well aware that Sukuna is a force of nature by himself. However, with Kenjaku and that other sorcerer with him, Yuji knows it'll be a challenge. The last time Yuji fought Sukuna was only at 6 fingers. Now Sukuna was well over 13 fingers. Sukuna was already strong in his own right the first time he fought him. However, it's going to be a different story now, and Sukuna knows a little bit about Yuji's technique. Yuta would then tell Yuji that even if he believes the Jujutsu sorcerers are not on his side, they are willing to help him, especially in defeating Kenjaku and Sukuna. He doesn't know about the rest of Yuji's plans. However, if Yuta has to become a monster, he will. Yuta is willing to do a lot more than Yuji thinks he is. Yuji would thank Yuta, however, he would tell him that he needs to focus on his own people for right now. Yuji is gathering his own force as he would look towards Uro. By the end of this, Yuji is going to have his own team that would help him in his evolution. Right now, one of his brothers was out there helping him gather cursed energy. He's half cursed spirit and has blood manipulation. Yuji would tell Yuta if he ever sees him out and about, do not fight him because they are on the same side. That goes along with someone named Higuruma. Right now, Yuji was going to go to another colony as he would ask Uro once more, does she plan on joining him later down the line? Everything that Yuji said before still stands. Uro would simply tell Yuji that she will think about it. She's still not quick to trust due to her past life. However, Yuji seems promising, so she will simply wait it out, see exactly what he can do, and then make her choice then. Yuji would nod his head as he would tell Yuta once more, do not stand in my way, otherwise I will be forced to kill you. As Yuta would simply let off a nervous smile as he would turn towards Uro, asking her for her points. Uro would scoff as Yuji would walk off. His next objective was going to be Tokyo Colony number 2. He heard that there was a strong fighter there, and hopefully they shared the same ideals as him. Yuji would get there, however, he would be surprised by what he saw. There was a huge crater in the middle of Tokyo Colony number 2, as he would see Sukuna there laughing, with someone split in two right in front of him. Yuji would think to himself, should he take Sukuna out now? It would be the better option. However, there were still things he needed to do, and filling the cursed energy in this colony, it was nearly full. However, Yuji would be surprised once more, as another player would sneak attack him from the back, as a liquid metal construct would try to strike Yuji directly in the chest. He would just narrowly dodge out of the way, as it would nick him on the arm. Sukuna would notice this, as he would look over and see Yuji, as well as see Yorozu. Yuji would kiss his teeth, realizing that he's been caught. He doesn't know how he didn't notice that there was another player right behind him this entire time. As Yorozu would scream out that she doesn't want any more people getting in her way. She has been trying to fight Sukuna for the longest. She's been trying to show Sukuna her love. She was waiting for that one lightning guy to die already. And next up was her turn. However, Yuji walked in here, and she doesn't want anyone getting in their way. She would scream out, sending the liquid construct towards Yuji once more, as Yuji would put up a barrier on himself, and fusing it with his cursed energy, causing the construct to fall directly to the ground, as Yorozu would let it dissipate, spawning it again right next to her, as she would jump onto the air, creating insect-like wings from the constructs, flying straight towards Yuji. As Sukuna would also sprint towards Yuji, he would scream out to Yuji, telling him that he's waited for him to come back. He's going to kill him, rip him apart. The embarrassment that he had last time was nothing more than a fluke. Sukuna has more fingers now, and he will show the brat exactly where he lies in Jujutsu sorcery. Sukuna would point his hand straight towards Yuji, as he would send out dismantles straight towards Yuji. Yuji would try to do the same thing he did before to Sukuna, wrapping himself with the barrier that was infused with his curse technique. However, surprising Yuji, the attack was a lot stronger than it was last time. It would go straight through the barrier, as it would connect with Yuji's arm. It wouldn't cut straight through it, however, it would leave a large gash on Yuji's arm. Yuji would use reverse curse technique healing it up, however, he would realize that he was in trouble. He didn't know if he'd be fighting both of them at the same time, or each of them individually. Yuji would simply smile, as just as he thought he'd only be fighting the two, a wave of ice would wash over the battlefield as it would attempt to strike Yuji. Yuji would jump up into the air, as he would realize this wasn't going to end well for him at all. Yuji may have been strong, however, he was never sure if he could face Sukuna at a high amount of fingers. He would simply have to rely on his wit and battle knowledge. Yorozu would send her liquid construct towards Yuji once more, as Yuji would be forced on the defensive. Sukuna, not giving a care in the world, would continue sending dismantles at Yuji, as he would have to continuously throw up barriers, stacking them repetitively, in order to try to combat Sukuna. Things weren't going the way he wanted them to go. If anything, Yuji would try to use his technique to escape, because he knew right now, with both Yorozu and Sukuna on top of him, things were going to take a turn for the worse. The ice sorcerer wasn't that big of a deal, however, with the constant pressure from both Sukuna and Yorozu, the other sorcerer would be a pain in the ass to deal with, so Yuji would simply have to grit his teeth for now. He would simply dodge Yorozu's constructs, while erupting barriers in order to deflect Sukuna's dismantles. Yuji would then say the word shatter, as his technique would then activate, making clones of everybody, as they would be scattered across the battlefield. However, Sukuna would begin laughing. He would tell Yuji that if he thinks a petty trick like this will work against him, he has another thing in mind. If Yuji wants to play it like this, Sukuna will simply erupt his domain and kill everybody and everything in the vicinity. While Sukuna was saying all this, Yuji was simply trying to take some time to gather himself, trying to figure out what his next action was going to be. He would think to himself, should he simply just retreat? Or should he fight? Taking them out here would honestly be a good thing, however, he doesn't know if he'll be able to take all three of them on at the same time. If anything, he might as well let Yorozu and Sukuna duke it out by themselves, and then Yuji will clean up in the aftermath. Or he will simply let Sukuna be, gathering his strength. Honestly, it was looking like the latter. Yuji might need to retreat for now, and come back later. Sukuna was a lot stronger than he thought he was going to be, and fighting a Sukuna at 20 fingers, or almost 20 fingers, was going to be a death sentence for Yuji. As long as he was able to evolve, he would be able to kill Sukuna. It doesn't matter how strong Sukuna is. Yuji will simply play it smart. He wasn't going to take his chances here. However, Sukuna wasn't having any of it. He would immediately say the words domain expansion, popping his domain for a second time, as everything within a 200-meter radius would begin to be torn to shreds. Every single illusion that Yuji had created would be completely eviscerated, turning the area into a wasteland, as both Yorozu and Urame would begin to use Hollow Wicker Basket. As just then, Sukuna would finally collapse his domain. He would laugh as he would see Yuji on the floor, with most of his limbs torn off, bleeding out. He would walk over to Yuji as he would step on his head and begin to crush it. He would tell him that he knows this isn't him, however, he knows he's listening. He would tell him this: the next time we come across one another, I will kill you slowly and watch you suffer. This new world that you want to create will not come to happen. I will be the one to create a new world, ruled by only me, while you will watch as I tear everything that you've grown already apart. Just you wait, brat. As he would fully crush the head of the illusion, watching it shatter. Yuji would still be in the area. However, he would have a veil over himself, hiding away from everyone, as he would simply let off an evil smile, thinking to himself that he fully accepts the challenge. He can't wait to put the King of Curses in his place. He can't wait to crush Sukuna under his own strength, and watch someone who views strength as absolute be crushed by that same ideal. This was nothing but a challenge that Yuji was going to accept. The only reason Sukuna was able to even do anything right now was simply because Yuji was caught off guard by the other people there. If Sukuna was alone, Yuji would have easily taken on Sukuna and killed him right then and there. Yuji would simply laugh as he would make his way towards another colony. And I think that's where I'm going to end it off here. I'm going to try to get started on the next one right away, but don't hold me on that, please. However, I hope you guys did enjoy this part, and if you did, let me know. And yeah, peace.